online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 1, I'm Nadira Tudor. COVID restrictions in schools for not a day longer than necessary, according to the Education Secretary. A confidential agreement between Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Giuffre will be revealed today, which could have big implications for Prince Andrew. And the search goes on. 2 people are still missing after deadly wildfires in Colorado. Tight COVID restrictions in schools will not be in place for a day longer than necessary, according to the Education Secretary. Secondary school pupils will be required to wear face masks, which the government hopes will reduce the spread of the Omicron variant. Students will also be tested in person this week. Ministers insist there will be enough lateral flow tests despite a nationwide shortage. Meanwhile, the government said they're concerned about a rise in over 50s being admitted to hospital with coronavirus, but ministers have insisted there's nothing in the data to support further restrictions in England. Intensive care numbers are said to have fallen slightly despite record numbers of cases.
What's happened in the last 2 weeks is we've managed to ride that out and go, look, actually, we recognise cases are high. We trust some of the public to make some of the good decisions. But actually, if you look at the data, ventilation beds show us that actually the severity of this disease is radically different.
In other news, a confidential settlement between Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Giuffre is set to be revealed today. It could be key to determine if Prince Andrew can be sued by Miss Giuffre, who alleges she was sexually assaulted by the prince when she was a teenager. Prince Andrew denies any wrongdoing. And 2 people are still missing after devastating fires hit parts of Colorado last week. Nearly 1,000 homes have been destroyed. President Joe Biden has declared a national disaster. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
And a very good afternoon to you. It's Monday, the 3rd of January 2022. I've got to still try and remember to say that right. It's bank holiday, which is a bit strange because it feels to me as though we've had a very, very, very long festive season. I'm standing in for Ian Collins today and tomorrow, then he's back from his holes. And how are you feeling about today's bank holiday? It's extraordinary in central London here, coming to the studio. I almost thought we were back in lockdown. It was completely deserted. I thought, that's odd. So maybe people are enjoying themselves at home. Or maybe you've had enough of the in-laws, the cousins, and you've gone shopping. Anything to get away after that long festive season. I hope you've had a great few days. What a weekend it was, dominated by the honours list and, of course, Sir Tony Blair. That really did get people going. Yesterday I set out in my Sunday sermon to the sort of fantastic, well-run nation that the UK should be. What it could look like with appropriate reforms. And I thought today I would set out the sort of the State of the Union speech that I think the Prime Minister should give this bank holiday to introduce this year. We've got some great guests. We've got Baroness Kate Hoey, we've got Tobias Ellwood, MP, we've got Molly Kingsley, we've got consumer champions and much more besides. But there's a really important thing happening with this week, which is masks. And I just want you to listen to this clip from the Prime Minister.
But not in the classroom, because that's clearly nonsensical. You can't teach with face coverings, and you can't expect people to learn with face coverings.
Unbelievable. That was the Prime Minister, August last year, saying that you can't learn with face coverings. What's happening? Face covering in schools. So I want your views. This is my big question to you. Are you a parent? Is your child going to wear a mask? Or indeed, do you think, whether you're a grandparent, is it right that children should still wear masks in schools? And tell me also, my other question, what are you doing to reduce your energy bills? I want your views, your thoughts. You're the most important guest on this show. Call us 0344 499 1000 or watch us on the app, the TV app, or on YouTube, Apple TV, Samsung, Roku, Rakuten. It's all there. There is no excuse. Or tweet us at Talk Radio, text 87222 using the word talk. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
Well, a very warm welcome to this bank holiday show of mine, standing in for Ian Collins. And I thought I'd start with what I'm sort of calling my bank holiday bazooka blast. And it's splitting into two parts. The first is the sort of State of the Nation, State of the Union speech that I would like the Prime Minister to give. I suspect he won't. But this is what I think he should say to the nation as we look forward and as we have some confidence and some self-belief that needs to build up. I think he should say that actually he, the Prime Minister, with his cabinet, they made the right call on not putting in more restrictions because of Omicron over the Christmas period in England, and that actually Wales and Scotland got it wrong, and Northern Ireland got it wrong, and that the Prime Minister made the right call. He resisted the gloomy entreaties of the doomsayers on Sage and on from the likes of Neil Ferguson. I think he should say, we need to get our lives back. We need to develop that confidence, that belief in our great country. And that's why he should say that we should now remove all of the Plan B measures that were put in place back in December. The wearing of masks, vaccine passports, mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff. All of this stuff is, in a sense, it's a legacy of last year's fear. We're into a new year, new hope, new ambition, and we need new confidence. And as part of the new year, the Prime Minister should announce that he's going to actually have a new team advising him on scientific measures. He should announce that he's going to scrap Sage, and he's got a new team of advisors, and he's going to thank the likes of Neil Ferguson for their services, but fire them. Because there has to be some accountability for people's forecasts, for their modelling. In business, if we get things right, you get rewarded. But if you get things wrong again and again and again, ultimately you get fired. And I think we need to hold people to that level of accountability in public service. And the Prime Minister should also say that this year we are going full steam ahead for growth. Putting the car, electric car, diesel car, whatever, putting the car into 8th gear. We're going for it. We're going for growth. And we're going to level up big time. And that means that we're going to cancel the tax rises that have been announced through last year, which hit the lowest paid and the smallest businesses the hardest. All of those tax rises actually are unnecessary, because if you have higher growth, guess what? You get higher wages, and in the medium term, you get more tax revenues. And that's what drives economies. And that is the way forwards. He should also say that we need to maximise the benefits of Brexit, one of which is to have the confidence to be much more self-reliant on key things, whether it's making vaccines, whether it's making PPE, whether it's growing more of our own food, using our fantastic farmers, the latest farming technology, vertical farming, all these things. These are things to be positive about and to go for. And one of the joys of Brexit, the real joys and opportunities of Brexit, is the ability to slash and get rid of what I call daft regulations. The sort of stuff that, frankly, drives us all mad in our daily lives. The sort of stuff where, as I said yesterday, where you open a brand new pair of cotton gloves, for example, and there's an instruction leaflet with the gloves that says, please put them on your hands. I mean, seriously? Why do you need to waste time on that sort of stuff? Madness. We need to get rid of the daft regulations and keep the smart regulations. That's how you create growth. That's how you create jobs. We need to, really importantly, accelerate the Nationality and Borders Bill that is so part of the process of reducing the illegal immigration across the Channel, and that should become law by the end of January, because I'm really concerned it's going to drift and drift. And the Prime Minister should also have the courage to say that, yes, we always want healthcare free at the point of delivery, but the NHS needs reform. Proper, real reform. The Prime Minister should also say that there'd be no Scottish independence referendum in this Parliament, or frankly under any other Conservative government. Yes, let's have an open debate, an honest debate about more devolution, pushing more power to the people, but no more independence. And I think, and I'm going to be talking about this later with Kate Hoey in this hour, the Prime Minister should say he's going to give the EU just 2 weeks more on the Northern Ireland negotiations, or we're going to serve Article 16. And if the EU, if they impose any sanctions on us after we invoke Article 16, which we're allowed to do, and it's designed to happen in the agreement, then the Prime Minister should say, we will put sanctions, we will retaliate, and we would, for example, stop any more of the divorce payments. Yes, the billions of pounds that were agreed as part of leaving the EU. And the Prime Minister should also say that he's aware of the huge challenge with the rising energy prices. He should be humble and admit that the Conservatives have got things wrong in the last decade. Bearing in mind, when they took power in 2010, we were pretty much a net exporter of gas. He should say we're going to review our energy policies and look at other utilities, because we're concerned that actually overseas owners of all our utilities are making excessive profits at our expense that hits the least well off the hardest. Because we need to be more self-sufficient, in particular for energy. It's so critical to all our lives. And perhaps the final thing that the Prime Minister should say, but of course will not say, is that actually he's listened and learnt and seen the increases in the budget, and he's going to scrap HS2 in its entirety and instead go for HS3 from in the north, from east to west, from Liverpool to Hull. That's the smart way, the real way to level up, and that was what he was elected to do. That's what he should say, but will not say. And to finish with my bank holiday blast, I'm going to make some predictions, and this is always a bit scary and a bit hairy, because they generally quite often may come back to bite me. But anyway, here goes. My fear is that the channel crossings in the boats this year they won't be 30,000, which is just about where they ended up. No, they're going to approach 50,000 people. My other fear is that, once again, one of the Prime Minister's promises will not be met. He promised there would be a public inquiry into COVID starting this spring. I don't think it'll start this year. I think that GDP growth will massively disappoint the Chancellor's budget predictions. But here's some upside. I think that this year the government will have to listen, and they will now agree, contrary to what they said at COP26, I think they will agree to grant some new exploration licences for gas in the North Sea. I think they will do that. I'd like them to say they're going to relook at shale gas and fracking. They won't do that, but I think they will say that about gas. And the final prediction I make, and again, this is quite bold, Crossrail. Do you remember that thing? Yes, we've sunk 20 billion quid under London in a brand new swanky tunnel and some trains and some signals. It's already 3.5 years late. It's 3.5 years late. It's supposed to open this spring. My prediction is it may well not open this year. It certainly won't open the first half of this year. That's the end of my bank holiday blast. Give me a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts. What do you want with masks? Are you happy that children are wearing masks in school? Will you be sending your child to school with a mask? Or are you going to make a stand because you think that actually Nadeem Sahawi hasn't got the evidence? Give us a call. Don't hold back. It's Tice Talk. Coming up, we're going to be talking to Baroness Kate Hoey about Northern Ireland. Stay with us. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Up front and bold as brass.
Rev it up and rant it out.
The nation's best debate.
Loud, alive.
A hippie to the hippie to the hip hop. Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk at 17 minutes past 1. Well, that certainly got people going on Twitter. My bank holiday blast. Jane liked it and said, great speech. Could you advise Mark Drayford, see if it's not too late for him to lift the restrictions? But oh dear, Tim didn't like it at all. This is actually quite an insult, Tim. A Keir Starmer speech, no charisma at all, I'm afraid. Dear oh dear, that's actually quite bad. Anyway, I'm delighted to welcome my first guest of the afternoon, who wrote a fantastic comment piece in yesterday's Sunday Telegraph about what should happen with the Northern Ireland Protocol this year, what the Prime Minister should do. I just touched on it there, saying that he should give the EU just a couple of weeks to see sense with these negotiations. But Baroness Kate Hoey, Happy New Year to you. Thanks very much for being with us this Monday bank holiday. I hope you've had a great festive season. I did really enjoy your piece yesterday in the Telegraph. In a sense, I think you feel that, in a sense, that it's time for negotiations has finished and the Article 16 should just be invoked. Is that right?
Well, I think, and Happy New Year to you as well, Richard. I genuinely feel that people are getting very frustrated here in Northern Ireland and indeed across the United Kingdom, that these talks, which Lord Frost was negotiating first, and now, of course, it's handed over to the Foreign Secretary, are just taking so long. And I don't think from anything that the European Union has said publicly, or indeed that we hear privately, is that they have any intention really of changing very much. They might do a little bit of tinkering, particularly with the medicines issue, where medicines weren't going to be able to come to Northern Ireland that were available in the rest of the United Kingdom without some great bureaucracy of EU approval. And of course, they were really hammered for that. But there's so much else that isn't happening and should be happening. But it's also, for me, it's not just about trade, it's not just about the issue of people not being able to get all the goods that they want to, and all the hassle and all the bureaucracy and businesses in England saying they're not going to send anything to Northern Ireland. It's actually about the constitutional position. Northern Ireland is being separated out from the rest of the United Kingdom. And, there is absolutely no right for the government to have done that. And now we're in a situation where the protocol isn't working. And I do think it's time for the Prime Minister, and particularly Liz Truss in her new position, to get tough.
Absolutely.
And they need to do that soon.
And I'm just going to read some of the words you wrote in your piece, which I think are crystal clear. You wrote, "Tinkering with trading issues at the Irish Sea border may help alleviate some of the ridiculous bureaucracy for business, but it won't be enough to stop the growing instability." And I guess that's the constitutional point. That's the concerns about the separation, Kate.
Yes, and it's a question of, we had the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, which took a long time to get put and agreed by both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And then that is now being broken. That is the real issue, because it is being splintered, because the East-West relationship and the balance between that and the North-South were meant to be very, very carefully balanced. And of course, we've lost the East-Wests. So all those people in Northern Ireland who feel pro-Union, pro-British, have their British passports, feel now that they are being abandoned, because as the European Union changes its rules, Northern Ireland being left in the single market is going to have to follow those rules, which means once again we will be further and further away in trading terms and in legal terms from the rest of the United Kingdom, and we'll have to be subject to the European Court of Justice, which is one of the reasons people voted to get out of the EU.
That's why we voted to leave.
Rid of all that.
So Kate, do you think that actually Lord Frost was perhaps being very careful with his words in his resignation letter when he referred to the political direction of the government? He didn't refer to the progress of these negotiations. Do you think he feels that the Prime Minister hasn't got the courage, the bravery to invoke Article 16 and he wanted to step aside? Or do you think it's still possible?
Oh, I do think Lord Frost understood the real difficulties the protocol was causing. I mean, I think he'd read the Belfast Agreement. I wonder sometimes how many MPs who speak out in Northern Ireland or government ministers have actually read it. So he did understand it, and I think he was getting very, very frustrated. But ultimately, the decision to invoke Article 16, and I have to say, Richard, invoking Article 16 only really leads to more negotiations, but it would send a signal that we were serious about getting rid of the protocol. But I think Lord Frost did his best. He clearly, the European Union feel that he leaving is good. They've welcomed that, because he did say what he thought quite publicly, and he made it very clear that it wasn't acceptable, and that the diversion of trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, which is now going to the Republic of Ireland, a lot more of that isn't actually in any way going to strengthen the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the union generally. So I think Lord Frost, but I do believe he also had very serious issues with the government over a number of the issues that you've actually mentioned in your little speech earlier.
Indeed. I think my concern is that Liz Truss, she's got a pretty busy in tray, hasn't she, Kate? She's Foreign Secretary. There's a lot going on in different parts of the world that will take her attention. She's also Minister for Women and Equalities, again, which is a really important role in its own right. And she has got some backup. I think it's Chris Heaton-Harris who's helping her. But I just worry that this isn't going to get the attention that it had, or the respect that Lord Frost had, as you've just said, in the corridors of power in Brussels. I think they slightly feared Lord Frost. I'm not sure they're going to fear Boris and Liz Truss in the same way.
Well, I think Liz Truss has a huge job now. She's got the equality, she's got all sorts of things, plus all the very serious international issues. I said in that article, which actually had come out first in the Belfast newsletter in a much longer format, but I said then that I thought she shouldn't see it as a poison challenge. I think there's a lot of people thinking that, Boris has given her this because if she's a rival to him in the future and she makes a mess of it, then that will go against her career prospects. I would tell her that it's actually an opportunity. if she's serious about preserving and sustaining and valuing the union, then she will take this seriously and not take any nonsense from Brussels. And I think we've seen some sparks of steel within her. But it is also, I think, going to what's going to happen in Northern Ireland over the next few weeks. I do genuinely think that there will be more issues. I think there is a real danger that the institutions in Northern Ireland will be pulled down. I think there's a legal action that might be happening that's going to be quite interesting. And overall, people in Northern Ireland have been very good. They've been very passive. That all of the anger that was there at the beginning in street discontent has been pulled back by very responsible community leaders and politicians. And I think that is the danger, that could go, because people will just say, nobody's listening to the political side of this, and therefore, what is the point of just staying at home and hoping things are going to go well? So I am worried about it, and I think Liz Truss should be too.
And you make a really interesting point that I think is perhaps misconceived by many, which is that invoking Article 16 is not the end game. It's actually the beginning of a series of further negotiations, but it clearly shows to the EU, to Brussels, that A, we're serious about protecting the union of the United Kingdom, and that B, actually the impact on Northern Ireland is way more than was ever intended, and it just doesn't work. It's unacceptable, and it's got to change.
Absolutely. And there's no need for it. That's the point. The tiny amount of trade that's going directly from Great Britain through Northern Ireland into EU territory in the Republic of Ireland is minuscule. And, all of that could be sorted quite easily by both governments accepting that they will monitor their own side of things. We don't need an undemocratic European court to be involved in that. We don't need Brussels to be involved in that. And we can't have part of the United Kingdom being run by a foreign court and by foreign rules and foreign judges. It's just not possible that should be allowed to continue. And I think the Prime Minister, does know that this has to go. The European Union have completely gone against the spirit of what might have been intended with the protocol. I was always against it, but there might have been a spirit of, let's see if this can work. It clearly can't work, Richard, and something has to happen very, very quickly indeed.
Well, at the end of the day, often these things require a certain amount of goodwill and let's try things and see how it works. And I remember the previous Taoiseach but one, Enda Kenny, when he, shortly after the referendum, just as all of these negotiations started back in 16-17, I remember him saying that with goodwill and technology, this could all be overcome. And actually, the technology is there and still there and probably even better. But sadly, there just isn't that level of goodwill to make it work. As you say, quite rightly, the quantity of trade that goes across from GB through Northern Ireland into the Republic is tiny. But as I always said, Kate, the quantity of trade that goes from Northern Ireland across the border into the Republic and vice versa, relative to all the trade across the whole of the EU, again, actually is really very small indeed. It doesn't challenge the integrity of the single market. It just requires a bit of goodwill.
It requires a bit of good, and I think from what you've said and what we know, it's clearly a deliberate policy of the European Union, backed up, I have to say, by the Irish government, to make it as difficult as possible for the United Kingdom. They didn't want us to leave. They saw Northern Ireland very cleverly, the Irish government very clever on this. They saw this as a way of kind of getting back at the United Kingdom. And there is absolutely no need for it. If the European Union are concerned about their internal market, then they can do some checks over the border, well away from the border. There's no need for a border down the Irish Sea, which is actually on the island of Northern Ireland, in Larne and Belfast and so on. And there's no need for a border at the frontier, which is where any border should be at the two countries. So this could be sorted with some goodwill, but I'm afraid if the goodwill is not there from the European Union side, then our government, the British government, has to stand up for British citizens and has to do what's the right thing, which is to get rid of the protocol.
Well, I think the right thing, Kate, also is that the Prime Minister should appoint you to the negotiating team to provide some backbone and some wisdom and some knowledge. Kate, thank you so much indeed. That was really helpful with an update of what should happen this year. That was Baroness Kate Hoey of Lisle Hill and Rathlin with her clear thoughts that now is the time to invoke Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's not working as it was designed. The goodwill isn't there. And the European Union, they need to know that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is deadly serious. The United Kingdom means exactly that. And no one's going to take away any piece of it. Give us your call, 0344 499 1000, whether you're sending your child to school with masks, what you think of masks, what you think of that discussion about Northern Ireland, or anything else, how your bank holiday is going. You know the number, or send a tweet. Stay with us. Coming up after the news, we're going to be talking to Molly Kingsley, co-founder of Us For Them, about these masks in schools. It's Tice Talk. It's the home of common sense. It is Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Reason re-engineered. Richard Tice on Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice. Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. Well, that was Baroness Kate Hoey with her thoughts on Northern Ireland. And just before we get the thoughts of Molly Kingsley from Us For Them on masks in schools, we've got lots of tweets coming in. A couple here, quite interesting. Hello, Richard. I was in our fantastic capital on December the 29th. Tubes empty, pubs empty. Talking to staff, this is how it's been leading up to Christmas because of the seeds of doom sowed by Secretary of State for Health, Sajid Javid. Tragic. That was a message there. Here's another one, which is interesting, from Mark. Mark says, can't quite believe this actually. Mark says, Boris to call general election in April. Really, Mark? He then goes on to say he now has some Scots and Welsh voters on side thanks to the lockdowns, referring to the fact the Welsh and the Scots have probably got that wrong. Labour on the fence, gaining splinters. He won't even need to campaign because there's no opposition, and he'll spend the next 5 years saying he was given a mandate. Interesting thoughts there from Musk. I'm not so sure about that. I think that's probably a bit bullish. My base case actually had been that a general election would probably be mid-2023, but I'm now actually edging that more towards mid-2024, particularly if there is a new leader of the Conservative Party, a new Prime Minister, if Boris gets the heave-ho from his backbench MPs. I think it all depends on that. If Boris has a good year and makes the right moves and stays in position, then he might call it in 2023. But if he gets ousted, I think an incoming PM would want to run it through until 2024 in order to give themselves sufficient time. We've got another one here. Great start to the year. Happy New Year from Paul in Crawley. He was rather more impressed with my monologue than dear Tim was a little bit earlier. Anyway, we will see. So I'm just wondering whether now this is great. We've got a tweet here from a 16-year-old. Brilliant monologue. I'm 16 and I refuse to wear a mask at school. We can't learn wearing them. We can't focus whilst freezing in classrooms. And even the Education Secretary has no evidence for it. Strange. And that's from Ash. Now, that's a really interesting point, actually. I don't think anybody's, in a sense, talked about, which is that we're told that the classrooms have to have lots of ventilation. So, of course, that means opening the windows, which means the poor children in the middle of the depths of winter, albeit it hasn't been that cold so far, they're left freezing. So they probably need jumpers and coats and hats and gloves still on. What are we doing to our children in the name of education? Ash, I think that's a fascinating tweet. He's 16 and he refuses to wear a mask at school. I have a real problem with these masks, and I don't know if any of you heard earlier this morning Julia talking to the Education Secretary, and I think we've actually got a clip of the Education Secretary talking to Julia early when, frankly, he was really struggling to give any evidence. Just listen to the Education Secretary. Here he is.
Not for a day longer than is necessary. Obviously, we introduced face masks in communal areas before the holidays because of the Omicron variant. And it's one of a series of measures because my priority has to be to keep children in school.
There we are. That was the Education Secretary, I think, frankly, clutching at straws to provide any evidence, basically because there isn't any. And he's going to come up with some sort of internal department survey. That doesn't fill us with any confidence, does it? That was him talking to Julia this morning. And delighted to welcome Molly Kingsley, co-founder of Us For Them, to the show. Happy New Year to you and a very good afternoon. Thanks for joining us this bank holiday. Molly, can I just remind you what the Prime Minister said back in August 2020? I think you may know this, but let's just, for our listeners, let's just listen to this clip.
But not in the classroom, because that's clearly nonsensical. You can't teach with face coverings, and you can't expect people to learn with face coverings.
There we are. You can't expect people to learn with face coverings. And yet, what are they doing this week, Molly?
It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's an absolute disgrace, because I think the thing here is we have a bunch of adults who know that this is potentially and harmful. You know, at the very least, we know it significantly impedes communication and what is education, if not communication. And yet they're doing it anyway. And I think if we just pause to think, big picture, where are we in the course of this pandemic? Well, we have a virus which thankfully looks to be relatively mild for the vast majority of adults and harmless for the vast majority of children. We have children who have been tested like guinea pigs obsessively on going back to school, so they shouldn't have this virus anyway. A fair few of them have been vaccinated, supposedly to, save their education, which we are now further impeding. And where does this end? Why are we doing this? And of course, we have adults who, the vast majority of school populations, will have been triple vaccinated, which is great. But why do we need this? And what do we think we're going to achieve by it?
I mean, I just find it extraordinary. I suppose, looking at it from, let's try and imagine what the unions, who obviously are quite powerful, some of the unions who've been, I guess, trying to persuade this course of action with the Department of Education. What have they been saying? They've been saying, well, we need it in order to protect staff so that there's not a staff shortage, because if there's a staff shortage, then you can't provide the supervision, so all the children have got to go home again. What are your thoughts to that line of argument?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we are far beyond the point now of needing children or requiring children to protect adults. I think that is actually frankly disgraceful and really very uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of adults at this point. It's very clear that children have already borne a disproportionate burden. I think just on its own terms, though, that argument fails, because we know by comparison with countries like Scotland, where sadly children have been masked in lessons throughout, and actually Scotland have higher case rates than us. So we know that this measure is not even likely to work on its own terms. And of course, the other thing we know here is that no in-school studies of the effectiveness of the measure have actually been done. And of course, we know that, this measure is harmful. Unfortunately, it looks like no adequate harm assessment of the measure was done, but this is a disproportionate... Sorry, Richard, yeah.
That in itself feels almost feels negligent that this time last year that the Department of Education didn't carry out a proper, in a sense, randomised trial comparing classes with children wearing masks and the opposite, with not wearing masks, to give some proper evidence. I mean, it's the former president of the Royal College of Paediatrics, Professor Russell Viner, I think it is. He said that there's no evidence that masks make any difference because they haven't done that work.
No, exactly. And I mean, I think negligent is probably letting people off lightly at this point. I think imposing this kind of measure on children, in the very height of a pandemic that was harmful to children, might be morally justified. I think doing so at a time when children and the vast majority of adults, thankfully, are not in danger, but we either know this measure harms children or we are refusing to look at the evidence, which has been there for a year. So when we threatened DofE with legal action back in April 21, we sent them a pack which was harms of mask wearing for children. And annexed to that pack was a whole bunch of peer-reviewed studies. So the evidence is there. It has always been there. If the evidence hasn't been read, then that, as you say, is negligent, or worse than negligent, actually. It's reckless if this is harming children.
I mean, it just seems extraordinary because normally there's always, in government departments, when they introduce something significant, they do some form of cost-benefit analysis to look at the consequences of a new course of action. This is a really significant course of action affecting the education and indeed health and anxiety of children. And yet they don't seem to have done that work. I mean, it beggars belief, actually. It's hard to believe that it's true, but it clearly is.
It is hard to believe it's true, and I think it's unforgivable. It's unthinkable we're here, actually. And of course, we know why we're here. We're here because, as you said, Richard, teaching unions have been baying for school closures. So we have this very uncomfortable false transaction set up that, it's either kids in school with masks or it's no school. But of course, we only have to look at what's happening in the adult world, where we're, mixing in restaurants and pubs, and what was everyone doing on New Year's Eve? Of course, it's not no school or kids in masks at school. That should never be the transaction. And
that's right. And here we are. We're lots of people are going back to their offices this week after a long festive period, and they're not going to be wearing masks in offices. They're not going to be wearing masks when you go to a pub or a restaurant. But the government is forcing the very group of people who are at the very least risk from this virus, mercifully, because they're our future, they're at the very least risk, and yet they're forcing the greatest imposition of suffering wearing masks. It's not just corridors in between lessons. No. It's 6, 7, 7.5 hours a day.
Yeah, it's absolutely abhorrent. And actually, I think, if you take heart from anything, actually, the reaction among, much of the adult community, but actually, as far as I can see, among many teachers as well, has actually been pretty appalled by this. And I think, the good news is that this is guidance. It is open to any parent who is uncomfortable to this to simply exempt your child. The Us For Them website has very simple template letters. You're not going to be breaking the law. You're well within your rights to do that. And parents should do that now, as too should teachers, actually, because we keep hearing from, we've heard from so many teachers over the last however long it's been, 36.
That's a key point then. What that really requires, I suspect, is it requires brave heads to say to the teachers, this is what I think we should do in our school, that we should not require masks. And it's not easy. It requires leadership and courage. But are you hearing from your parents or anyone that is going on anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen a few examples, and there've been a few on social media as well, of teachers and heads actually who have said, actually, we are uncomfortable with this and we're not going to do it. And that, and it's wonderful to see, because my sense is that whatever you think about wearing masks as an adult, there will be a great many adults who are, as they should be, deeply uncomfortable about requiring children to wear masks for 7 hours a day at a point when the vast majority of adults are not required to do it. It's just wrong.
Well, hopefully also there are more children like Ash, the tweet you may have heard just before. Ash, who's tweeted in, he's 16 and he refuses to wear a mask in school. We can't keep wearing them. We can't focus whilst freezing in classrooms. Fascinating. Molly, we could go on forever, but time is against us. Thank you so much for those thoughts. That was Molly Kingsley, co-founder of Us For Them, the parent group, doing sterling work, standing up for the rights and education of children, which is, of course, literally the future of our nation. Coming up, we'll take your calls, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Get a grip.
Raw talk, pure energy, more taste, more flavour, more outspoken than ever.
Clear-headed, honest opinion.
Lively debate.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and at the top of the hour, we're going to be talking to Tobias Ellwood, MP for Bournemouth East, about non-COVID restrictions, Plan A, Plan B, and also about Russia, the massing of troops on the border. We've got some great tweets coming in here about the interview with Baroness Kate Hoey, supportive and less so. One here from Rick on the Isle of Wight says, congratulations on the State of the Union message and the interview with Kate Hoey, whereas Jonathan, he doesn't agree at all. Why did you invite the totally inaccurate Baroness Hoey, who knows nothing about the Northern Ireland trading border with the European Union? I have to say, Jonathan, given that Kate Hoey has grown up and lived in Northern Ireland, I think she knows probably more about it than millions and millions and millions of people across the UK. So I don't accept that at all. Anyway, keep those tweets coming in. We've got an interesting question here, actually, which my next caller may have a view on. Says here, this is from Chris, who says, Richard, do you think that wearing face masks may encourage COVID as you're breathing the same air over and over again in the classroom? I think he meant to say. Well, we've got on the line here, we've got Matthew in London, who's a music teacher. Matthew, good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon, Richard. Thank you for having me.
Great pleasure. Happy New Year. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the good thing actually was being put on hold was I got a chance to get my on my iPad notes kind of things to write. Say, I think, firstly, I think it's a massive psychological step backwards to have the optimism of a new year and that feeling that we're in a much better place than suddenly to be hit like this. And I use the word feel because I don't think it's anything nefarious in terms of conspiracy ways, but it does feel like almost like a deliberate morale crushing sort of technique, having the masks brought back.
That's a really great point. The psychological impact. It's sort of like going backwards at a time when we should be looking forwards into the new year with joy and hope.
Absolutely. I think. I mean, I've got so many. I think to rein myself in, so I don't go off on one. But I've got so many negative things to think of masks in education. I think they're very harmful. Some of the things have already been said by the lady from Us for Them, but I think they're very harmful for mental health. I think they reinforce the negativity in children. I think when you're younger and you learn about mortality and you have a granddad that dies, or you gradually find your way through it, and that's how it should be. And I think the last 2 years, I think the media have been irresponsible by into children's homes, just having this non-stop talk about illness, death. And to me, I think the government's done it to really hammer it to make sure emphatically that everyone got the message. But throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I think something that's actually it's the only danger is it's contagious.
Yes.
The actual thing in itself is very little danger. So I think it's been too much.
Been overused. Now, Matthew, do you think whether it's a principal or head where you teach or elsewhere, are you hearing of heads who are able to work with their common room, their staff, their teachers, in a sense, to agree that actually in schools they're not going to impose masks because it is only guidance?
Well, what I've experienced is I'm a visiting teacher. I work in 4 different schools, and it's very interesting, without naming it, it's very interesting the different approaches that take, because there's one I love teaching in, because you go there and it's what I call sensible risk. There's reminders to wash your hands, but not going on at you. So it feels like it's just a very sensible. It's an acknowledgement. There's something that's going to make you ill, but it's not. It's a measured sort of response, and the teachers generally don't wear masks, and it's a very nice kind of. The children seem happy, and then it ranges from that to lots of tense faces and reminders, and which is again brings this point, isn't it? I think the effect it has on children. I think it's really can't be underestimated.
That tension is that's right at the other end of the spectrum, and that I guess is tension amongst the children and the adults, the teachers and the support staff.
Yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it, with anxiety? Because I've thought a lot about it because sort of just through living life, and I think people watching. My dad works for the mental health charity Mind, and I think the anxiety in itself anyway is a very contagious thing. If you're in a lift, for example, and someone's very, very panicky and keeps saying that they're worried about the lift's going to break, it's infectious. It spreads so quickly to other people. People start second guessing. People think, should I be worried? And I think this is what we're seeing, a kind of like something innate in our human psychology, a kind of mass hysteria, if you like.
It is. It's that constant fear mongering, which I think does create that mental anxiety and that harm. And I think it's disgraceful they haven't measured it. Matthew, thank you so much for those thoughts. That was Matthew in London, a music teacher who teaches across 4 schools and is seeing quite a different approach with different leadership teams, different heads in the schools, from the sensible to the tense. And I worry that tension leads to anxiety and harm for children. We've got Howard in Rotherham. Good afternoon, Howard. Happy New Year to you.
And the same to you, Richard.
Thank you. What would you like to say?
Well, I've been listening to the whole subject since 5 o'clock this morning, all about the face masks in secondary schools, etc. And it's been mentioned 3 times, and no one has really taken it on board to make that the subject rather than trying to hit the government for it. And that is that the teaching unions are the ones that almost demanding that the kids have to wear masks, otherwise there'll be no teachers in the schools.
And Howard, because I don't think it's all the teaching unions. I think some are adopting a much more pragmatic, balanced approach.
Unions, but from what I've heard, tongue in cheek, it's the ones that are that the headmistresses and headmasters are in. It's not necessarily the basic school teacher, and I mean that with the greatest of respect. But basically, it's a case of we either have 1,000 and 1,500 students in school with masks on, or we have with masks on and full of teachers, or we have 1,000 to 1,500 students in school and nobody there to teach them.
Yeah, well, I tell you what I'm going to do, actually, Howard. We're going to try and see if one of the team can look up which unions it's understood are taking a balanced approach and which are demanding that masks be worn. Because I think it must be some of the unions that are making these demands on behalf of their members. Otherwise, I actually just don't think the Secretary of State for Education, Nadeem Sahawi, I don't think he would have just unilaterally decided, from what I know of him. I think it's clearly significant pressure that's been brought to bear. You think it might be the union that represents the heads?
Yes.
Which would surprise me, actually. That would surprise me. But we'll try and find out as to that. Just whilst you've got you there, Howard, interesting observation coming here about will the teachers themselves be wearing face masks? And again, I suspect that will be a bit of a mix and match.
Well, exactly. That part of it hasn't actually been brought into conversation as yet.
Well, I guess that will be very interesting in itself to understand. I would think that if teachers are imposing requirement to wear masks on the children in the classroom, I think it would be unbelievable, unforgivable actually, for the teachers themselves in that classroom not to be wearing a mask. I actually can't envisage it. I mean, the whole thing must just be a sort of muffled mess.
I'm sure you're right. But at the end of the day, I just think that the government, including the Education Secretary, are trying the best to make sure that they've got every available child in school when they start back.
Which we can understand. Obviously, children are much better in school than at home. The other fear, of course, Howard, was this huge, horrifying statistic that there were some 100,000 what they call ghost children that after the first lockdown essentially never went back to school again and essentially have just been lost to the system. I don't know how accurate that is, but the very concept of it is awful.
I live, it's quite true, because you see young teenage children walking the streets, during the day when they should be at school.
That's right. Howard, thank you so much for that. That was Howard in Rotherham with his thoughts about which of the unions are the ones that are putting pressure on the Department for Education. We're going to try and see if we can get some clarity on that through the course of the show. Meanwhile, we've had a nice tweet here from Stacey, very eloquently put by the music teacher, which was fantastic, actually, his thoughts from the 4 different schools that he teaches at. Stay with us. We're going to be coming up after the news, speaking to Tobias Ellwood, MP for Bournemouth East, and also he is the chair of the Defence Select Committee. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the second hour and we're just trying to clarify for you which of the unions we think may be putting the pressure on the Education Secretary. Back in the middle of last year, apparently it was the National Education Union and GMB that were pushing for masks, not the Heads Union. So we're just trying to see if there's any clarity on that. Anyway, we're moving forwards and I'm delighted now to be joined by Tobias Ellwood, MP for Bournemouth East and Chair of the Defence Select Committee, to look at the issue of the restrictions that were put in place, the Plan B restrictions just before Christmas. And actually, I think that the 101 Tory MPs that essentially rebelled against the government's line were actually the ones that gave the confidence and the courage, as well as a little bit of a sort of a challenge to the Prime Minister to resist the entreaties of the doomsayers. And Tobias, I think you actually voted against vaccine passports within that. Happy New Year to you, Tobias. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good to be with you this afternoon. And yes, here we are yet again. It's 2 years after the whole Wuhan development came onto the global stage. It's another year since a lockdown as well. I'm pleased that the government held its ground, and I think there was relief across England as such. I know the other regions did a different thing, but absolutely that the government made that difficult choice. And this is the difference between what the medical advisors are saying, this is what we need to do to make sure that we stay healthy, but also what the politicians need to do to say, well, what's the wider impact on our economy? What's the wider impact on our mental health? What's the wider impact on our schools, our schooling, our education, and indeed our ability to endure this? You've got to put all those into the pot, not just the health aspects of it as well. And that's why making decisions and the leadership that's required here is much more than just the medical evidence itself.
Well, it's that great expression. Certainly, I come from the world of business, as you know, Tobias, and there's an expression: advisors advise, directors decide. And likewise in politics, advisors advise, and leaders, cabinet members, they have to make the decisions. Politicians have to decide. And it's almost almost the first real big example where actually the cabinet and the Prime Minister overruled the scientists to a significant degree. It then begs the question for me, and I put it in my opening sort of monologue earlier, Tobias, that we've got a new year and maybe it's time now for a new broom of advisors, because there's only so long where these doomsayers, some of the sage modelers and things, and the likes of Neil Ferguson, how long do we keep accepting them getting it wrong, terrifying the nation, rushing onto other broadcast channels and say they're speaking in their personal capacity when clearly they're not? How long do we put up with this before you say, actually, I'm going to get some different advice?
Well, it's interesting that you craft the discussion in this way. I said way back, when this first broke, that we were relying on a peacetime cabinet construct. It's the way government operates, is tried and tested, but it's very safe. It's very, very risk averse. And when you move to a war footing, whether it's dealing with biosecurity or indeed, as we saw in the Second World War or something like that, you need a different situational awareness. You need faster decision making. You need better, not better people, but different types of people to make those decisions. And I'm afraid we stayed on the peacetime model, and to some degree, it's actually stayed that way as well. I do hope, with all the pressures and all the challenges that the government is facing, and let's be honest, it's been a difficult couple of months, we will start 2022 looking at how we can do things differently. I make the point that from a biosecurity perspective, and I mentioned Wuhan deliberately, we are likely to see another pandemic in the next decade, I'm sure, whether deliberate or by accident, and we're certainly not out of the woods with this one yet. We've had it for 2 years. There's probably a couple more years to go. We could see another mutation. We need to get better at dealing with enduring emergencies, swifter decision-making, stronger leadership, effective communication.
Without question. And just before we move on to some of the sort of international matters, Tobias, in terms of the Plan B restrictions, how quickly do you think they should be and could be lifted, and how quickly do you think actually the Prime Minister will take to lift them, bearing in mind we've got a real life example versus Scotland and Wales.
Yes, that's right. Very interesting to make those comparisons. But I know the Prime Minister will be making a statement on Wednesday. We come back to Parliament after the recess itself. I also know that some of my parliamentary colleagues are calling for more data sharing of the actual modelling itself. So that actually helps us better understand, how the government is trying to persuade the nation. But it also means that the nation itself is more likely to follow suit, because it's with the consent of the British people that we can actually get through this. If people don't apply the rules, if they don't follow what they've been asked to do, then it becomes much, much harder, much, much difficult for government to then take us out of the woods. So I hope we'll see some clarity of that on Wednesday.
And just, we've been talking about masks earlier in the show, which obviously is a really hot topic and a very, I think, difficult topic for children and parents. I've had a tweet in here earlier from a 16-year-old who said he's not going to wear a mask. What's your view on masks in terms of whether they should or shouldn't be worn in secondary schools this first half of this term?
If you're tackling any form of pandemic, you've got to find ways of breaking the ability, for it to mutate, for it to actually spread. And you have lots of tools in the box to do that. The most, ruthless is a complete lockdown. So the idea that we're introducing this for schools is one measure that you can take. I'm hesitant, I'm reluctant to go down this road, partly because I think of all the peer groups, of all the parts of our society that's been most impacted. I would argue possibly it's been the children and their education and the long-term consequences of that. When you reintroduce masks as well, that creates a different teaching environment. I really would be against this. So I'd want to see, go back to my original point, the evidence to say it's worth doing this. I have to say, I'll give a plug for this, Nadhim Zahawi, the Secretary of State for Education, was the former vaccines minister. We don't have a better paced person to make wise decisions about this rather than just second guessing or simply following the medical guidelines.
Well, certainly there seems to be a shortage of evidence at the moment, but he has actually this morning on his discussion with Julia promised that there is an internal department review which is going to provide some additional thoughts, I think what he calls evidence, later this week. So he has promised that. I certainly haven't seen any evidence. If we can move internationally, Tobias, whilst I've got you, obviously you've just touched on biosecurity, the issue of possibly the deliberate release of another pandemic. And that takes us really to other nations such as Russia, that's currently massing its troops on the border of Ukraine. And it's in a sense, we know Putin is always trying to gain advantage. He's always looking for more leverage. What do you think is his key objective here? I've been talking recently on the show about, does he just want to get Nord Stream 2 open? Does he just want to keep gas prices high? Where are you on this matter? As you're so knowledgeable as chairman of the Defence Select Committee.
Well, thank you. I think we've been asleep at the wheel here. We've allowed Russia to advance its own strategy. It's very clear Putin is angry that he's no longer a superpower. He's taking advantage of the West, which we've become, if we acknowledge this, too risk averse. Afghanistan is a great example of that. We wanted America to take the leadership from the West. That is simply isn't happening. They're so tied up in their own issues. You've got midterms as well. There's going to be problems with the West, taking that original role on the international stage. Meanwhile, our adversaries, not just Russia, but China as well, are taking advantage of that, making it very, very clear that we have a weak rules-based order. The UN, World Trade Organization, NATO, EU, even the Commonwealth, they are unable to hold countries to account and influence in the way that they've done in the past. And Russia is taking full advantage of that. He recognizes that with Ukraine, there's never been a better time to invade this country. He sees anywhere in Eastern Europe that speaks Russian that should be therefore governed in some form by Russia. Russia should have influence over those areas. So that includes all the Baltic countries, parts of those as well, but specifically on Ukraine. He's worried that they may join either NATO or the EU in the next decade or so. Therefore, best to have a buffer between the Russian Empire and the EU. Best way to do that is to then do a land grab in the east and the Donetsk region of Ukraine itself. And as I say, there's never been a better opportunity than in the next few weeks. It probably wasn't going to happen before now because they have the Orthodox calendar, so their new year is still to come. It's a week or so away. I suspect, if I was a betting man, that's when an invasion may take place.
Okay, that's interesting. So you genuinely fear that he wants to invade to make that land grab, as opposed to just using it for negotiating leverage to get commitments that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO, about Nord
Let's make
Stream
it really,
2?
really clear. If you want to have that leverage, as you're suggesting, you don't put field hospitals and special forces in. He's got 100,000 troops as well. You can do that simply with infantry and artillery. But he's got all the other assets that you need to actually invade, and the consequences of that. Missile systems there too. So he's fully aware that he could actually get away with it. Yes, we've thrown potential sanctions at Russia, but he is very, very aware that any sanctions imposed on Russia would actually affect all the people Russia still continue to trade with, not least in the energy sector. So they won't work as we'd like to do. So longer term, the more that we don't address and deal with Russia, the more we push Russia into the hands of China. And that then becomes an even bigger geopolitical challenge over the next couple of decades.
Let's just look at those sanctions, because it has been suggested that the US and the West would cut off Russia from the international banking system, the clearing system, were they to invade. That feels pretty strong. Do you think that could happen, and do you think that would work or not?
They will try and attempt to do it, but like I just suggested, the SWIFT system, if you affect Russia, you affect also all the countries that do business with Russia. You affect all the stans, you affect all the Eastern European countries. Not only that, it would have a knock-on impact into the oil and gas movements as well. So we all know that these are just words at the moment. I stress the point that the West has, over the last decade or so, become so weak. We require a Sputnik moment to recognize that, the trajectory of where our world is going. Authoritarianism is on the rise, and we're doing little about it. As the United States, as I suggested, is stepping back. This is an opportunity, I could stress, an opportunity to Britain to step forward, as we've done in the past, to show what global Britain should really mean, rather than just being a phrase. We have the hard power, we have the soft power, we have the strengths. What we're missing is the appetite to step up to the plate and play a role on the international stage.
And at the end of the day, of course, money talks, particularly with Russia, because in a sense, exports of energy is probably their key revenue generator. And actually, I think one of the biggest things that Europe, which of course purchases so much gas from Russia and to a degree the UK, but actually a threat over the medium term to completely abandon making any purchases of gas from Russia. I mean, that could be really significant. It couldn't happen in the short term, but over the medium term, that is something that we should be looking at, shouldn't we?
I think it should be. We need a Russia strategy. You need to be able to wean yourself off both what Russia, in my view, and what China does as well. Because as long as we have these economic ties, then there's no way that we can actually influence or have any pressure on Russia in this way. And they are fully aware of that, and they are exploiting that. So Nord Stream 2, which is what you mentioned just earlier, that deliberately bypasses Ukraine. But unfortunately, in continental Europe, there is not a clear view as to how we should deal with this. And until we start to regroup, and still we recognize where the world is going, I'm afraid it's going to be a very, very bumpy decade indeed.
I think you're right. And just before we go, Tobias, just this issue of biosecurity and the threat of another pandemic and a potential deliberate release. As you said, it was almost exactly 2 years ago that there were rumours of a nasty form of pneumonia coming out of Wuhan. I mean, how concerned are you about this biosecurity threat, either from a rogue nation or rogue actors within a nation?
Well, you're right to say rogue actors as well, because whatever military capabilities are being developed now by states, they slip into non-state actors' hands over time. That's usually what we see. And you can see an extremist jihadist operation taking full advantage of this, knowing full well how it would actually knock many of the Western countries back. We are so intertwined in our global efforts now. Just remember when that ship blocked up the Suez Canal, how it rippled right across all the economies. Same with the pandemic as well. It causes such massive disruption. And then, of course, it then leads to populist governments being elected as well. It sows massive discord in Western societies. And we don't have a plan. We need to recognize that we need a biosecurity approach to this, as we do with other physical threats, nuclear weapons and so forth. And we need to get together. It can't be that a country where there is the source of where this came from is able to deny the World Health Organization an entire year before they can go in and make their inspections. That isn't the way that we should be operating in today's day and age. But it goes back to my very point. Our international institutions are so weak now, they are no longer have the power to hold these countries, these errant nations, to account.
I agree entirely with that, and we've got to be so much firmer and stronger. In a sense, the only way to deal with a bully is to stand up to a bully, whether it's in the school playground or in international affairs. Tobias, thank you so much for those thoughts, and a very happy new year to you as well. That was Tobias Ellwood, MP for Bournemouth East and chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. Coming up, we're going to be taking your calls, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Best recipe ever.
Pan-national agitated debate and discussion.
Radio with an answer for everything.
Powered by your opinions. Something to talk about. Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 2:20, and that was a great chat with Tobias Ellwood, the chair of the Defence Select Committee, setting out his concerns on the international stage with Russia and with biosecurity and indeed China. My concerns about China is that, having essentially, the virus came from China, almost certain that it leaked from the Institute of Virology in Wuhan. There they are. They've given us the virus, and then they've made billions selling us PPE and billions selling us testing kits. And we've got a couple of tweets coming in here. One from Mickey, who says, with regard to the face masks, 6 to 7 hours in a cloth mask. I'd love someone to test the dirt and the germs on that mask, which a child has been inhaling from. # despicable. Mickey, I think that you could be onto something there. We've got Tom in Perthshire on the line. Tom, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Richard, and a very happy new year to you and your listeners.
Thank you, and to you. So what's the mood in Perthshire, Tom?
Oh, the mood in Perthshire is always optimistic, Richard. We are desperate to get rid of Nicola Sturgeon at the first opportunity, and please God, we'll do that sooner rather than later.
Yes, well, it's quite a challenge, that, but I think the halo is slipping a bit, and her call over the new year on these restrictions may well have made that halo slip further. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was interested. You had a caller much earlier on, Richard, who was deploring somewhat, I think he called it invasion from Scotland and Wales into England. I would see it as a very positive thing. I see it as the people voting with their feet, actually.
Yes, that's absolutely right. In a sense, and all those that came to party, yeah, people are voting with their feet. But unfortunately, back last May in the elections, Nicola Sturgeon, she did pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it is inexplicable, Richard. I mean, the depth of, and I've spoken to other presenters about this, the deep-seated bigotry and racism of a certain proportion of the Scottish population towards the people of England is embarrassing, and it defies any sensible explanation whatsoever. But that is what it is, because they are the people who were happy to put disgusting messages on motorway overbridges last year. Stay away, we don't want your germs, and blah, blah, blah. Absolutely embarrassing. Terrible.
Do you think that's shifting a bit, that's softening a bit, or do you think it's completely hardcore amongst some sort of extreme pro-independence people?
Well, if I may take that cue to tie in two parts of the story, I think I would argue that the case for Scottish independence has got nothing to do with Scottish independence, and it has everything to do with Irish nationalism. Because if you overlay a map of the yes voting areas in Scotland in 2014 with the predominantly Irish Catholic immigrant areas in Scotland, it is an exact match. And it is that deep-seated Irish anti-London, anti-English thing which is driving it. And Nicola Sturgeon is trying very hard to turn Scotland into Northern Ireland. She's using flags, she's using language, she's using grievance and blame, and it is absolutely chapter and verse from the Irish nationalist playbook. It is exactly the same thing, and that's what she's trying to do. And I think people are very, very polarised. Since 2014, there's been no coming together. And I think, actually, I don't think the vote would be substantially different. I just think people are much more polarised into their...
You don't think there's much shift over? In a sense, there's not been that much shift over with regard to the other polarising vote, of course, which was the Brexit referendum.
Of course, and actually the reason I called was following your conversation with the excellent Baroness Hoey, who I've heard many, many times, and I respect and admire her hugely. I wish, and I realise we cannot rewrite history, but if the British government had been smart, the day after our referendum in 2016, we should have encouraged the Irish government to have a referendum as well. Because we recognised, and I was, like you, Richard, I was involved in both of these referendums, actually, and I won both times, 2014 and 16. But the people on the Leave side of the argument in 2016 understood that Ireland was always going to be an issue, and what we should have done was to offer the Irish people the opportunity to build on the common travel area which always existed since 1923, and we should have said, if you vote to leave the European Union, you can have BIFTA the next day, the British-Irish Free Trade Area. Therefore, no problem with trade, therefore no problem with travel, any of that. And what that would have led to is the Irish people, I believe, would have voted to remain in the European Union, fair play to them, but what that would have done then is put the onus
would have changed the negotiating leverage
Union for protecting their external border. And what you would have ended up with, Richard, and please forgive me laughing a little bit at this, you would have had the delicious irony of German troops standing on the border between North and South of Ireland, and bloody good luck to them with that.
I'm not sure. Tom, thank you very much for those thoughts. That was Tom in Perthshire. We're going to go quickly to Andrew here in London. Andrew, good afternoon. What are your thoughts on this bank holiday?
How you doing? Can you hear me okay, yeah?
Great, go for it.
It was just, my concerns is regarding this latest lockdown scare, because I work in exhibitions in London, and all my work has been cancelled up to March. So, and obviously because it's not a full lockdown like we're told to stay in like we were before, there's obviously going to be no support for a lot of the freelancers. And I mean, I'm talking all the freelancers are just there, and we all had bookings from the end of January, mid-January, like our normal year had just come back. And I worked last year. I mean, the last show I did was, luckily I had something in December. A lot of freelancers don't get it in this industry in December. It was abroad. We came back, and then obviously as we were coming back, we entered these new restrictions of we must have tests to fly back into the UK and all this. But now there's no work until March, and I mean that's only a postpone. I mean we're all concerned it could obviously get even worse.
Deferred even worse. That's right, because there's just so much uncertainty, and therefore businesses don't want to invest. They don't want to make short and medium-term commitments whilst that uncertainty exists. And in a sense,
they're pulling out the shows, so because the shows normally, if people start to pull out, the shows get cancelled. So, but okay, and we're not just talking the freelancers who put the shows together. We're on about the people who design, organise us lot and get us there in the first place. We're right at the end of the bottom of the spectrum. We're the people that just make it happen. But the people that organise it, and then we make it happen for them, and the organisers and all them, they're out of pocket as well. And it's just...
Yeah, so you really are, in a sense, you're at the end of the supply chain for that industry, and being freelance, you're suffering the most, and in a sense, having the greatest impact, because you've got no certainty, no security.
No, not at all. And we've got no insurance. We're not on PAYE. We get paid.
You're taking the freelance risk, that's right. Andrew, well... I hope it gets better. My sympathies are with you. I completely understand. I think the government throughout the whole of this crisis has almost abandoned and ignored so many freelancers, and I hope that things get better for you in your endeavours. That was Andrew, a freelancer in London who's really struggling. Stay with us. After the news, we're going to be talking to Khalid Mahmood, Labour MP for Birmingham Peribah, about firms that are profiteering from furlough. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice
On Talk Radio.
Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV. From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice.
Fighting your corner.
On Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio. It's just gone 2:30. We're halfway through the show, and of course at 4 o'clock, back for the first time in the new year. Yes, it's Jeremy. Jeremy Kyle is back at drive time, and then at 7 o'clock, also back, will be Kevin O'Sullivan. So don't go anywhere. Listen to those great shows. So we've been talking there, a couple of great calls from Tom in Perthshire, talking about his concerns about Nicola Sturgeon, but also completely separately, a freelancer who's essentially suffering probably the most from the uncertainty from this crisis, while some other firms, and we need to talk about this, have actually done very, very nicely as well. Because there are some healthcare firms, for example, amongst others, who've claimed furlough, and furlough was the right thing to do at the time because it was designed, and I think very effectively achieved this, it was designed to provide firms with some cash flow in the early days of lockdown. It was designed to stop firms having to lay people off because they couldn't afford to pay them. And it was also designed to provide security and certainty to employees that they were going to continue to be able to pay bills, put food on the table, and so on. And it did that really successfully. What furlough was not designed to do was to provide additional profits or to protect profits of any businesses, but least of all in the healthcare sector. And there's a really interesting piece in today's Daily Mail about a number of healthcare firms who were paid, hundreds of millions of pounds. There's one here that received over 300 million pounds from the NHS, a firm called Ramsay Healthcare, but still claimed well over £500,000 in furlough money. There's another one here where HCA Healthcare was paid circa £190 million by the NHS in order to keep some of their private hospitals open. But the firm also claimed furlough of some £3 million. And I think quite rightly, actually, pressure should be put on those firms to return that money to the government. And I'm delighted to be joined now by Khalid Mahmood, Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr. Khalid, Happy New Year and welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. So, Khalid, I just think it's immoral and it's completely against the spirit of what furlough was designed to achieve. Where are you? Where's the Labour Party on this?
Well, actually, absolutely. I think where those firms, particularly on the back of COVID, have raked in huge amounts of profits on the issues that were horrific to the whole of the nation. And we needed those services, and we were trying to get through to them, and have made such a profit on that. And I think taking furlough as well, I think is a bit rich. And I think there should be at least some sort of sense by these companies who made lots of money and not to take the furlough. The furlough was there to support those companies that would be possibly going under. None of these companies in the health sector would be going under because the pandemic actually boosted their incomes and the money that they were getting from the general contracts and huge amount of more contracts and perhaps at some inflated prices as well. And so we need to look at that and see where the corporate responsibility is in relation to this.
One of your colleagues, Stella Creasy, was quoted as saying, this is companies using the NHS as a cash point because of COVID. And I think that's a really good way of describing it, actually. I just think it's morally wrong. The flip, what can the Labour Party do? What can you do in the Commons in order to exert some moral pressure, if not legal pressure, on the firms involved that have been highlighted, and no doubt many others?
Well, what we can do is, as normal, we try to do on COVID statements. We can make representation, and I'm sure a lot of colleagues will be doing that, and we should do that. Certainly on health questions, we should raise that. And also through Opposition Day, I think we should seriously be looking at that. And I hope when we speak to the government, as I will be to the shadow cabinet team, asking them to look into this very seriously. Wes Keating is the new Secretary of State for Health. He's very conscious of this, and I'm sure we'll do something. And I think it leaves back again to the Labour Party to awaken the conscience of the government to try and do something, where the government, I think, should really now be asking these people to look hard into their bank accounts and see what they can pay back to the public, having spent huge amounts of money.
I think that's right. And maybe actually MPs, where some of these firms are headquartered in their respective constituencies, maybe they could almost do the reverse of normal and actually write to the chief executives of these businesses and say, look, actually, this is wrong. And if you want to continue to have the support of people in the community where you're based, then you need to do the right thing. It should be said, of course, Khalid, there are actually lots of firms that did do the right thing without any asking. I know, for example, there was a magazine called The Spectator. They took some furlough because they weren't sure what would happen. And I know voluntarily, very early on actually, they announced that they had returned all of their furlough money because they were, in a sense, pleasantly surprised that subscriptions continued to be paid and it was okay.
Well, that's the right thing to do. I think where companies have received that. I know even small businesses, as my constituents, I had a meeting with some last week, some pharmacies, post office, and even a tea shop who've done not very well through this period, obviously because they didn't have the footfall that was there and they looked for the support. But people who had continued business continuation, and those in the health sector have done that. A lot of them in media also have benefited from that. And I think it is the corporate sort of conscience that should be raised. And if it's not, then we have a right in Parliament to make sure that we do that.
I think that's right. It's quite interesting just to quote a couple of examples that we dug out here in the team. A firm of estate agents called Foxtons, they took almost £7 million in furlough money and business rates relief and decided not to repay the cash, although actually estate agents, against the expectation, received a real sort of boom in trade, whereas rival agents called Knight Frank, they actually repaid the furlough money. So it does feel to me that there's an opportunity just to ramp up the moral pressure on these businesses.
Absolutely. I think, look, there are some responsible employers, as you just named, and I think there are also people who are trying to get away with it. And it shouldn't be for taking the taxpayers' money to get away with. It should be trying to support the country to come through this huge issue where we had a health pandemic and also a financial crisis almost based on that, and the government having to spend our money and our children's money perhaps. And the conscience should be clear of these corporate firms who should not take that money for granted, but take it only if they need it.
I mean, I think it's worth saying the research that we did showed actually we came across more firms that have announced they've given furlough money back than not that have kept it. But I do think it's something that really, in a sense, there's no end date to this. And I think we've just got to keep moral pressure on those businesses that haven't yet done the right thing. But of course, there is still time. Khalid, before we let you go, whilst we've got you, in terms of schools opening this week, where are you and the broader Labour Party on face masks? Because there's precious little evidence, proper trialled evidence, scientific evidence, that face masks in schools, children wearing them in classrooms, has any health benefit, and real concerns that it has actually a significant both health and education harm.
Well, I think there is some benefit. I believe personally there is benefit from wearing masks. It's important, particularly when you've got 30 plus children in a classroom where they're going to be affected possibly from even somebody sneezing or coughing in that area. It does provide some protection. And I much rather have some protection than no protection at all when these particularly
Khalid, how do you balance that against the known harms that it causes in terms of restrictions to the ability for decent learning? The Prime Minister himself, actually, in a clip that we played earlier in the show, said that it was much harder to learn with face masks, but also the mental health issues, the anxiety, the delay in speech development. These are really serious things, and I just don't think that's being properly considered.
Well, it is very serious, and children's education is always and must be treated as a very serious issue. But also, this pandemic will cause issues if you allow it to go and check, particularly with teachers. If the teachers are there, you can't teach the children. The problem has been here really is that we should have looked at this. The government should have looked at this. This is now the fourth time we're facing this situation, where I said this last year that we had time over the summer to look at how we can make classrooms better, how we can better ventilate them, and to look at how we're supposed to teach and allow different teaching places.
Khalid, you talk about the ventilation. You talk about the ventilation. I've had a tweet in this afternoon, Khalid, from a 16-year-old who said that it's freezing in the classrooms because they open all the windows, and guess what? It's the middle of winter, so these poor children are sitting there with jumpers, with coats, gloves on. I think the point is, at the end of the day, the teachers have all been vaccinated, so their risk has been dramatically reduced. And of course, the children are not the ones who are at risk of this disease.
Well, I agree that what I've said is that we should have looked better at better ventilation systems rather than just opening windows. We should be looking at circulating the air within those classrooms. We should have done that. We should look at different venues as well, far larger venues. We have community sports halls and school sports halls of where we can hold these classes to do that. None of that thinking has been done over the last year, and I think that's where we should have been. That's where we should have been much more positive in doing that. So I think we should have been positively done.
And Khalid,
in looking at this.
In the secondary schools in your constituency, do you think the teachers will be wearing masks as they teach to children that are sitting in the classrooms wearing masks?
Yes, teachers will, unless they have to do something where they have to take their mask off. I think predominantly they'll wear face shields and masks as well in some instances. So both those things they'll use according to what's necessary in the classroom, because it's important for their own health as well as it is the children's health.
Brilliant. Well, just to finish with Khalid, we've had a tweet in here whilst we've been talking from Peter in Stevenage. He says he's more interested in receiving evidence than personal opinions. I think the key is to find the evidence, and I just fear that it's not that yet there, although the the Education Secretary this morning to Julie Hartley-Brewer has promised there will be some evidence provided during the course of this week. Khalid, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. Wish you the best for the new year. That was Khalid Mahmood, Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr, with his thoughts on both firms giving money back if they've actually benefited, that's furlough money, but also his thoughts on masks. He's willing to accept masks in classrooms. I have to say, I respectfully disagree. Stay with us. Keep the calls coming. 0344 499 1000. And coming up later on in the show, in the third and final hour, we are going to be talking about. We're going to be talking with a consumer journalist about electric car charging points and the pressure on homes and electric capacity. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Captivating, campaigning, controversial.
Reach for the story. Radio with grown-up opinions.
Don't get angry, get on Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio. We've got some great tweets coming in. One here from Tim asking a question about Tobias Ellwood as the chair of the Defence Select Committee. Has that committee got no power? He says the government's been asleep at the wheel regarding Russia for a decade. What's he done in his role as chair talking about Russia? In fairness to Tobias, actually, over a long period of time, he has been consistently talking about the need for the West, the US and the UK to adopt a more robust, a stronger approach on the international stage and to be more aware of the dangers of some of the states who do not wish us well. So I think actually that is fair on Tobias. Another one here from Paul who says, Tobias Ellwood has echoed my fear. The current pandemic has been a massive success for China. A ruthless dictatorship will be quite capable of repeating the exercise, particularly if faced with another leader that has their measure, such as Trump. That was from Paul in Aberdeen. Interesting thoughts there. We have Luke in Bromley. Good afternoon, Luke. Happy New Year. What would you like to say?
Happy New Year, Richard. Thank you. And firstly, just thank you for getting involved with so many things that bring common sense into the conversation.
Well, we're trying.
Thank you for all that. No, you personally, I really appreciate that, whether it's on LBC and so on. Thank you. Sorry, not LBC, Talk Radio. Listen, what I'm phoning about is basically the masks. My children are about to start secondary school tomorrow, go back, and they're going to have to wear masks. And I don't think we know there's hardly any science around them. It's more of I think they'll work. Yet we know in many respects they don't. They obviously reduce interaction with each other. They cause people to breathe more heavily, so if there is a virus, and it would go further into your lungs. We know it circulates air that your body's trying to get rid of, which is actually not good. We know it creates a wet, perfect little garden for bacteria to grow, which you then breathe in. We know that it reduces oxygen.
And in terms of, it's really difficult for children because, in a sense, and we had a tweet earlier from a 16-year-old who said he's not wearing a mask. But for younger children, then it's harder for them, in a sense, to make a stand because they don't want to be the odd one. If you've got a whole class that courageously says, that's it, we're not going to wear a mask, forget it, teacher, then that's much easier for them. But it's much harder if it's one or two in a class of 25 or 30.
Exactly. You're right. Peer pressure, unfortunately, goes against them with this. And, it's really not good. I mean, look, there's a university in Italy which did an 8-month experiment with using surgeons to test shifts, wearing masks or not. And they found that it actually reduced the oxygen inputs or the oxygen in the bodies by 17 to 23%, So
really? And where was that study from again?
That was a university in Italy. They basically studied the surgeons which were willing to do that. So they're wearing normal masks. And oxygen, increases your white blood cells, which then fights viruses. So why do you want to reduce the amount of oxygen going in?
Well, I haven't seen that study, but I might try and look that out because it's such a big topic. And my real concern is, whilst the government may say, it's only for a couple of weeks and we're going to review it, we know what that means. I mean, it was only 3 weeks to flatten the sombrero, and many, many months later, years later, we're still dealing with this. And I fear that if they're wearing masks at the beginning of term, they'll still be wearing them at half term because of some of the attitudes of the unions.
Sure. And the thing is, I was sitting at a carol service with my father over Christmas, and I looked at him wearing a mask, and you could see this mask going in and out like a balloon type thing, you know what I mean? And
completely.
And I said, how was it? He said, I was struggling, to be honest, to breathe. And I thought, that's just not good.
It's not good, but it's that fear, isn't it? That's what worries me. Luke, great call. Thank you so much. That was Luke in Bromley with his concerns about his children having to wear face masks, but so difficult, actually, in a sense, with peer pressure to stand up and decide as a child in a secondary school not to wear a mask. I think we've got Mike in York. Mike, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Richard. Oh, yeah, okay.
How are you doing? What would you like to say? Happy New Year to you.
I will listen to the great Kate Hoey.
Yes.
And a fantastic lady. And one of the things that you failed to mention is that the Irish government's been boasting about the direct ro-ro ferries to Europe.
Right.
They've now, instead of the land bridge using the UK, they now are using from Cork and from Dublin direct ferries to mainland Europe.
Yes, I had heard about that. I hadn't seen any data about the quantity. Perhaps you know.
Yeah, they've got about 44 sailings, I think. That's what they're boasting anyway. Obviously, it costs a bit more, but after the disgraceful land bridge treaty with Ireland and with the land bridge.
Between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
Yes, where they just kind of cut England out altogether. You couldn't believe it. So they've already solved the problems. We don't need to worry about the Article 16.
Well, that's a really interesting point. I just haven't seen the data as to the quantity of trade that is going on those ro-ro ferries. In a sense, what that is actually, Mike, is that's private businesses working out either a more efficient route to market or a lower cost route to market. And in a sense, you've hit it on the head. If that's happening to a meaningful degree, then they've just found an easier way around it. And it's pretty extraordinary that wasn't, in a sense, discussed beforehand. Mike, great call. Thank you very much for that. We've got just got time for Kev in Portsmouth. Kevin, good afternoon. Happy New Year to you. Where are your masks? Do you like them?
Yeah, hi Richard. Happy New Year to you. Do I like masks? No, I've never worn one, never will wear one. No. Regarding the children, what needs to happen is from tomorrow, it needs to be a national campaign where parents need to say, look, we're not putting this on our children. They can't put it in the hands of the teachers because the teachers have got an agenda to keep these on these kids. This is psychologically damaging these children, and it will do for future years.
I think that's my concern, Kev. And
it's a concern.
It's
a fact.
it's a fact. But the thing is that there are still many people. We just had a Labour MP, and I think there are many in the Labour Party who still think it's
the same thing, aren't they?
who still think it's a good idea, even though the evidence is there. The one that terrifies me the most was the anecdote I heard of a class of 3-year-olds in a nursery, and there were 13 3-year-olds, and of those 13, 5 of them had significant speech delay in terms of development of speech for a 3-year-old for their age, because basically they'd been wearing masks, they'd had much less interaction, and hadn't been able to see other people's faces, mouths moving. I just think we've no idea the damage.
No, I mean, based on what you just said, that's good enough reason for all children to say we're not wearing these. But it's the parents that need to stop this. Take your children out of the schools until the teachers get their acts together. All these MPs are in the same boat. They're pushing the agenda, keep pushing the agenda. But we've got to say no to all this. Literally, it's the people that need to step up now in this new year and say we're not doing this to our children. This is a form of child abuse, if you don't mind me saying.
Many people have used that expression, Kev. Many people have used the expression of, is this essentially child abuse? And it feels like it to me. Kev, thank you so much indeed. That was Kevin Portsmouth with his view about masks. And the tweets coming in, it's quite extraordinary, actually. One here from Terry says, well, this is an interesting question. Why not get school children to wear clear face shields instead of masks? Here's another one, a message comes in. I cannot understand why were you saying they must have maximum ventilation and then asking all pupils to effectively put a curtain across their mouth, thus stopping the free flow of air. This must be detrimental. That was from Paul in Epsom. There's another one here from Terence. Masks. UVC light can effectively kill SARS-CoV-2 due to the fact that it presents less of a health hazard. I'm not sure about that, but I think there's no doubt that there's real concerns about masks, and actually parents have got to stand up and say enough is enough. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. Here we're in the third hour and the final hour of the show before it's drive time with Jeremy Kyle, who is back after the festive break for his first show of the new year. Now in this final hour we need to look at the big issue of the months ahead, the difficult issue, which is energy prices and everything related to it. In particular, what are you going to be doing in terms of trying to reduce your energy bills as we all become more aware of it? Are you specifically looking at certain things that you can do to reduce your costs? So give us a call or send us a message to let us know particular things that you're doing, tips indeed, that you might be able to pass on to fellow listeners and viewers. And we've got to talk about, we're all being pushed and pressured to buy electric cars. And I'll be honest, I've bought one myself and actually I love it. It's great. It's absolutely fantastic. But there is, of course, an issue, which is electric car charging points. And you need to be able to either charge your car at home, in which case you've got to make sure you've got the capacity to do so with your electricity supply. And actually, for many of the cars, it's better to you're going to need more capacity with your homes. And that's before you install what the government wants you to do as well, which is to install a heat pump. And there are actually many cases where if you're going to have a heat pump and a car charger, then you're going to need to upgrade your electricity capacity. And I'm delighted to be joined by Holly Mead, consumer journalist at The Sun, this afternoon to talk about this, because there are some people who are doing really rather nicely out of essentially creating this extra electric capacity. And it's not us, the consumer. Holly, good afternoon to you. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining me. What are you hearing from your readers and around and about in terms of people who are trying to install these car chargers and suddenly faced with huge bills to create additional electric capacity?
Yeah, I think it's a worry, and cost and charging are two of the biggest concerns for anyone considering an EV. One thing I would point out with the capacity is the upgrade that many people are looking into doing to get your home from a standard of, say, 60 amps up to 100 is if you want to do this super speedy charging at home. Actually, what a lot of people, and I wonder if you do this yourself because you say you've got your electric car, do is they charge overnight. And then it doesn't matter how long it takes. And a lot of people like to do that, particularly if they're on an energy tariff where off-peak usage is cheaper. So you can end up filling up your car for about £5 if you do it on one of those tariffs overnight, which for the initial outlay, obviously, you recoup the costs when you compare that to filling up the tank of petrol, particularly at the moment, quite quickly.
No, I think that's right. And it's interesting. I mean, some homes will take it. But for example, when I went for Christmas and I tried to plug in my car to the electricity system in my sister's house, it's fair to say it was only about 30 seconds before, frankly, the whole house was plunged into darkness as the fuses went and all sorts happened. So I suspect there are many, many homes that can't actually take just a normal charger and therefore have got to spend money on some additional upgrade.
Yeah. And I'm sure you were super popular as well on that visit.
It's fair to say I was super unpopular.
One thing that people can look into is there are starting to be more grants available to help, because obviously the government are steering us, excuse the pun, in the direction of electric vehicles. So you have to get in quickly before the end of March. You can get help with the installation costs of a charging point up to 75% of the cost back. So if you are considering an EV in the near future, even if you don't have one yet, that might be something to consider doing, even if you were perhaps thinking of reselling your house and you thought that might make it more desirable for the next owner. So there are schemes out there that, to help encourage us, are trying to cut the costs.
Yes, I mean, my other concern here is And there's an interesting piece in another newspaper, not your own newspaper, regarding an engineer from Wales who he made the inquiry, and he may have been living in a village, slightly remote location, but he wanted an inquiry about upgrading the capacity to 100 amps, and he was suddenly given a bill from his local distribution network operator, these so-called DNOs that are all powerful in this situation, and was given a quote for £14,000 in order to provide the upgrade. So surprise, surprise, he hasn't progressed with his EV charger nor the proposed installation of a heat pump. I mean, it does seem to me these DNOs, these distribution network operators, they've really got the upper hand. And I've actually also had a personal experience about this. They can make fortunes.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised he didn't progress with that, because not many people are lucky enough to have a spare 15 grand sitting around to spend on something that is perhaps not necessary. Again, I'd say look into grants with the heat pumps as well. There are a few schemes that can help. There's a new one coming in April as well, which could get you up to 5,000 off the cost of the installation. But if you're looking at 15 grand, that's still not a cheap bill that you're left to pay. I think, sometimes shopping around can help, getting lots of different quotes and taking that, somewhere to say, hey, you're overcharging. But I think it's a case of, often with new technologies, until there is the scale there, you are almost, it feels like penalised for trying to do the right thing.
And exactly, and it's probably okay if you're living in a relatively modern home with a very modern electricity system and distribution board. But I had an experience as well with a commercial premises where someone was trying to install a supercharger, and that required an upgrade to the electricity capacity, and that was a different operator. That was UKPN, the DNO there. And again, the quote from them was absolutely huge. And my concern is that once again, the government's pushing people, as you rightly said, steering people towards these EV chargers, but actually some firms, these DNOs, are going to make fortunes out of it. UKPN, for example, is owned by a Chinese billionaire, and it seems to me they've got a complete monopoly on this, and they're going to do very nicely.
Yeah, it's worrying. I think the hope is that as more of us move to EVs, then the number of suppliers and operators in the market broadens out, there's more choice, and normal market forces kick in. But yeah, being the first over the parapet is sometimes not great on your wallet.
I don't think it's great on the wallet at all, and I don't think the government has really any idea. And my concern here is that these, in a sense, the regulations is supposed to be monitored. The regulator Ofgem is supposed to be monitoring the charges, but I wonder really whether they're on the ball on this. It's still developing, it's still emerging quite rapidly, but there's potential for massive delay here.
Yeah, for sure. And as you say, Ofgem have got their hands full as well with a bit of an energy crisis for households across the UK. So they're perhaps weren't on top of many people's Christmas cards list this year.
They have indeed. Holly, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Holly Mead, consumer journalist at The Sun. As more people are buying electric cars, that's fine in one sense, but they then find there's a very hefty bill to upgrade the electricity capacity with their distribution boards and fuses, etc., in their homes in order to be able to charge them overnight. I think we've got time, just got one caller before we go to the break. Rita, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Richard. How are you?
Great to hear you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was talking about the mask. You're saying that children shouldn't wear the masks in the classrooms, but what happens if unknowingly the child got COVID because one of his parents, he or she parents had COVID and passed it on to the child, and the child, if he or she wasn't wearing a mask, could unknowingly pass it on to another child.
Well, in a sense, this is the big thing, isn't it? About transmission, asymptomatic transmission, much of which is unknown. But there's lots of questions as to the efficiency of the mask, whether actually they work or don't work. And I think the real concern is that there's no evidence in the classroom environment, and this is what was being asked of the Education Secretary earlier today, Nadeem Sahawi. Where's the evidence that masks in classrooms stop transmission? And he wasn't able to provide any by way of any form of random clinical trial, a proper scientific trial. He's just referred to the fact that he's going to be giving out I think a sort of internal department review, sort of anecdotal type study, which doesn't really seem to cut the mustard in terms of being able to actually prove, given that we know that there are other harms on children from wearing the masks.
Oh, I see. When we spoke last week, I thought you said there about case when you were talking about children learning, wearing the mask, and they get mental health problems.
That's right.
There was about cases very small. There were about 20 children who got affected or something. But that was still 20 children. That's still a lot, even if it's one child affected.
Look, the reality is there are millions of children in schools, primary schools, secondary schools, up and down the country. And of course, in a sense, any child that's affected is in a sense an issue, but there are many, many, many more children who are affected by the anxiety, the lack of development, speech delays. This affects hundreds of thousands of children, and that just overall anxiety and that sort of feeling that they can't enjoy themselves, they can't express themselves, it holds back the whole development of children. I think that's the far greater concern, particularly, of course, Rita, when we know that actually, and mercifully, children really are the least at risk from this virus. There are very, very, very few children who've suffered very badly from the virus. Yeah,
I see. Yeah, because I can understand if the teacher wasn't wearing a mask, because the teacher would keep his or her distance between children, because the children are sitting 30 children in a class, they're sitting so approximately so close to one another.
But of course, the children, in a sense, the teachers will have all been, I'm pretty sure, will have all been vaccinated, so they've had that protection in terms of the risk of suffering severely, being hospitalised or worse. So they've got their protection, but actually children need the protection of knowing that they can be properly educated and develop as children in the way that we always have done when we were children. Rita, thank you so much for your thoughts. Coming up, that was Rita from Slough. Coming up, what tips do you have? Give us a call for reducing energy bills. This is the big issue of the day, the week, the month, the year. We've got a huge energy price crisis. How do we keep the bills down? If you've got any tips, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk at Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. 21st century debate.
Speak once, think twice. Talk Radio.
Exhalation. Conversation. Confrontation.
Plain talking, common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are well into the third and final hour of my show before Jeremy Kyle comes back for his first show of the year at 4 with Drive Time. We've got some great tweets coming in, and I think I've hit something with this issue of electric capacity for homes, for heat pumps and car chargers. We've got a tweet here from Peter. Peter says, electricity capacity is a massive issue. Most older homes are supplied with a 60 amp supply, upgrading to 100 amps, already at full capacity with sockets, showers, cookers, etc. Fast chargers need a dedicated 30 amp supply, which will overload most existing systems. I'm not an electrician. Don't let me anywhere near any form of fuse board, that is for sure. But what I do know is that this is an issue, and I fear that there's an opportunity for some of these electricity companies, these what's called district national operators, DNOs, to rip us off, to essentially overcharge consumers. And I think this is going to be a massive, massive issue. Another issue for people, particularly who are amongst the least well off, who can least afford some of the bills that are coming through down the pipe, is the issue of charging extra money for those who've got cars above a certain age. And we've seen here in London with the mayor, yes, Sadiq Khan, who has extended the emission zone, now imposing a £12.50 charge. He's broadened that emission zone for cars beyond a certain age. And of course, the reality is, who does that hit the hardest? It hits the least well off, those who can least afford to upgrade their car, to renew their car. And then they're going to be hit with these additional bills, which may impinge on their ability to get to their preferred supermarket, their ability to take their children to school if they're close to that borderline, or their ability to go to work, to the job that they've got. And I just think this is, frankly, brutally unfair. You've got other cities, you've got Bath, Bristol, Birmingham. In Bristol, for example, they're now charging older cars and £9 per time that you cross into a particular zone. And it's rumoured that Cambridge and Oxford and Manchester, Bradford, Sheffield, Newcastle, they could all be next. Where is the fairness in this? So it's all right if you're well paid, you've got a great job, middle class, then you've got a nice brand new car, lovely. This isn't an issue for you. But if actually you've got a lowly paid job, whatever it is, and you may be just recently out of college, coming into work, you might recently be out of university, so you're getting on the ladder, and actually you're penalised the most. I just think this is, frankly, brutally unfair. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, what you think about this. And it's not just the charging, of course, it's also the imposition of the low traffic neighbourhood schemes, again, without consultation, that is impacting so much on people. And one of the consequences of this is that it may force people to do something they don't want to do, which actually, in order to not have to pay that charge, they may then clone someone else's number plate. And there was something in one of the papers this morning that essentially these green penalties for older cars is fueling a rise in cloned plates. And I've actually seen an experience of cloned plates with thieves and criminals. But here you've got people, if they're being forced to resort to breaking the law because they can't afford essentially to cross the border into one of these zones, then I just think that is completely wrong. Give us a call or send us a message, your thoughts on this. I think there's a much better and fairer way of being able to, in a sense, continue to make progress, reducing emissions, maybe more filters, but it's clearly not right and not fair and not just that the least well off should be penalised the most in all over the country with cars. We've got, I think, Robert in London on this. Robert, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Richard. Thank you. And a happy new year to you.
And to you too.
Thank you. I'm just stupefied at the stupidity. And it's not stupidity now. I actually believe that there's a degree of orchestration. When the 2008 Climate Act was voted on in Parliament and passed, people have to understand that 20 to 25% of their energy bill every month since then has been taken and handed over to private companies to push the green agenda. And we're all made to feel guilty because if you don't agree with a science that hasn't been debated or discussed, it's a bit like the Brexit thing. You're a racist because you believe in national borders. And we know that story and how that ends. What we're seeing with this energy security, well, it's a question of energy security. Well, they've used that money to reconstitute the grid and make more so-called renewables. And, of course, in Northern Europe in the winter, when the peak demand is around 5 p.m., you have when it's cold, so you don't have the temperature differential between up above and below, so you don't have any wind. And, of course, it's dark, so there's no solar. What you end up with is a grid that has less capacity. And capacity isn't just about how much you can deliver. It's about the volatility in surge demand and how you can then satisfy that. And our grid has had its capacity removed using our taxes for the last 15 or so years. And as a result of that, and then with Putin tightening up gas price, restricting gas flows, the price has gone through the roof. And I have no doubt, Richard, that the government, in a panic, because it's been a mild winter so far, but if it gets really bad and energy prices keep going up, in a panic, the government will bankroll a bunch of futures contract and pay the absolute historic top ever before the gas prices start coming down again. Because let's remember that in America, they pay 10% of what we pay for our gas.
Oh, it's driving me mad, actually. You're so right, Robert, because this is just, in a sense, ordinary people up and down the country, millions of households, are paying hundreds of pounds in subsidies to pay these the renewable generators in order to essentially protect their profit margins. Very often, and what really winds me up is that huge numbers of these solar farms, these wind farms, are owned by overseas investors making mid-teen returns, propped up by renewable subsidies from the least well off all over the UK. I just think it's absolutely disgraceful, and it's one of the things that my team and we're going to be really looking at this year, because the numbers on this are absolutely horrific. I mean, and as you say, the government might try some short-term gimmick, but what happens if there's a really cold snap in January and February and early March, and that gas prices don't remain at these levels? They don't go down, they go up, Robert. What happens then?
Oh, look, Richard, I am fairly convinced, not everyone in Westminster, but Westminster is a place, and I like the Reform Party, and I like what you call the consocialists. It is a place where people with good intentions may go in, not all of them, but they're all lobbied and coerced, and maybe they're blackmailed, who knows, and induced. And these guys end up spending our taxes and giving them to private companies. You know, the 2009 financial crisis, we saw the bailout, right, with the banks. The energy, these energy subsidies they dwarf the payments that were made to the private banking sector.
They absolutely do. It's over 10 billion a year now, Robert.
It's incredible. And when you try and explain this to people, because they're so brainwashed by the media, because you're immediately labelled. Look, I believe that the biggest risk to the planet right now, from a green standpoint, is a plastic in the ocean. I won't bore you why, but it is a big problem. And of course, when you try and explain to people, look, you're giving away money to private companies to push agendas which involve batteries, and batteries are absolutely filthy for the planet in their manufacture. But it's all these foreign companies who make all this money and use our taxes. And in the meantime, our blood, sweat and toil is given away. And I don't think it's honest, actually, the transaction.
Well, there's a great, just to pick up, for example, we've had a tweet in here, Robert, from Jack, who tweets, subsidies grants comes from our taxes. So the lowest income earners are helping those well off enough to afford an electric car, which obviously are more expensive, and then to get a subsidy for their home charging unit. This is unfair. And it actually, that encapsulates it, doesn't it? Once again, the poorest are subsidising the wealthy middle class who can afford electric cars. It can't be right.
Yeah, and I really hope, I wish you every success. I actually was one of your TPCs in the 19 election.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you.
Yeah. No,
well, stay with us, Robert. We're going to have an active year. It's full on. We're only a couple of days in, but there's a lot to be done, and it's so important because at the moment it's just not right that the wealthier, the well-off, the high earners are being subsidised by the poorest. That was Robert in London. Thank you so much for that call. That was Robert. And coming up, we're going to be talking. We're talking about wine pricing, as well as these rising energy bills. What we can do about it. Give us a call 0344 499 1000 if you've got any tips how to reduce energy prices, and keep the tweets coming in. It's Tice Talk at Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice
On Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV. From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice. Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the last half an hour, and I've been ranting about energy prices for some time now, and I have to tell you, I'm going to be banging on about it, I think probably for the rest of the year. It is the big topic. It's not COVID anymore. It's not Brexit anymore. It is the cost of living, and that is driven by energy prices. We've got a tweet coming in here from Gaza, who says, all this electric car, heat pumps going green, rising energy prices, just another valid reason, this is interesting, why people should give consideration to not voting Tory in the next general election. And another good point here from Mr. Woodward, who says, I live in a first floor flat with no off-road parking. How would I charge an EV? Another great question. All these practical issues. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by an expert in this issue of taxes, of the cost of living, because he is chairman of the Bow Group, which is the world's oldest, that's extraordinary, the world's oldest conservative think tank. Hard to know what to say, really. Ben Harris-Quinney, a very good afternoon to you. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Happy New Year. And look, Ben, in a sense, I mean, this is just unbelievable. The cost of living crisis that's it's sort of imploding on all of us, that's going to affect the least well off the most. And we're seeing headline after headline after front page article after front page article about this and the need for the government to do something. And in a sense, it feels to me that there's a short-term issue and then there's the medium-term issue of becoming self-reliant with cheap, affordable energy to prevent this happening again. What do you think in the short term that the Prime Minister and their government's got to do to stave off what could be an absolute horror show for people over the next few months?
Well, in the last year, we're looking at oil and gas price rises of between 20 and 30%, which is obviously huge. And all indications are that in 2022, that could well go to 100% over 2 years. Now, the Conservative Party promised to reduce people's energy bills in their 2019 manifesto, and clearly that's not happening. And what we are saying is, whilst net zero and the green agenda is seen in the aisles of Westminster as being sacrosanct, actually, no, it isn't. What is sacrosanct is keeping the lights on, is keeping people's budgets in check. And price rises like 100% over 2 years in energy is going to bankrupt a lot of people and a lot of businesses. And the government needs to wake up to that reality. I mean, the naivety of what they've been doing, of the policies they've been pushing, a lot of which have been virtue signaling, the green agenda stuff, and just completely taking their eye off the ball on things like gas storage, gas procurement, even coal power stations, because it's all very well having these high ideals about the environment, some of which may be valid and some of which I think are a bit questionable. But nonetheless, everyone needs to keep the lights on, everyone needs to keep their heat on, and that is the priority. And the government somehow has lost sight of that.
Completely. And of course, I mean, there's talk, for example, just one item is the energy cap, which is around about just under £1,300 for the average household. There's fears that could rise to as high as £2,000 as an average for a sort of an average household from April. But of course, that extra £700, Ben, you've got to earn £1,000, give or take, in order to be able to afford the £700. So, in a sense, gross of tax, that's about 3 or 4% of the average salary in the UK. I mean, this is beyond at the margin. This is really serious sums that's going to make life incredibly difficult for people, and that's just energy.
Yeah, I mean, of course, energy is a major driver between the rest of the problem of inflation that we're seeing across the economy. But when the Prime Minister and when the government talk about, good news, the people's wages are up, it's only relevant to what inflation is and how much their bills are going up. And at the moment, what we're seeing is that wages are certainly not rising fast enough to keep up with bills. And I think the real rate of inflation is actually far higher than is reported because of the indexes that are used. So ultimately, people are poorer. And as you say, for most people and for most families, an extra £1,000 a year is a lot of money. It's the difference between, for example, going on holiday or not going on holiday. And for the poorest people, it's the difference between having the heating on and not having the heating on.
And let's just be clear, Ben. These renewable subsidies, which represent about 25% of people's electricity bills, that's taking money from ordinary British consumers up and down the country, and it's putting that money in the pockets of predominantly overseas investors who own these renewable projects, the wind farms, the Drax power station and the like. So it's basically impoverishing ordinary citizens to enrich overseas investors. I think it's morally bankrupt.
Yeah, and if you go before people as they did at COP26 and as they always do at these conferences, and say, we want a nicer environment. Well, that's a very easy idea to sell, and that's what the Conservative Party said in their last manifesto. What they haven't done is publish the costs and published a detailed plan. And it's both the costs to the government, to the exchequer, but more importantly, the cost to each individual in their pocket. And I think as that starts to become clearer, as it already is, we're already talking about 30% rises, then I think people are going to start to look again at this net zero idea.
So Ben, so Ben, help me on this. So I've talked about the short-term issue, but you've talked about the Tory manifesto, the 17 manifesto, wonderful document put forward by Theresa May, no doubt. That included a commitment to create a whole new industry with thousands of jobs, called shale gas. Just another promise that the Tory party then reneged on. And we know that actually shale gas in the US is the very reason why gas prices in the US are just a fraction of here in the UK. So where are you on shale gas?
Well, I think the tragedy is both on shale gas, on North Sea, on oil, on coal even. The government has completely discarded it on the basis of the net zero green agenda, but they haven't replaced it with anything. And so what we're actually now doing is we're importing gas from abroad, which is worse for the environment, because not only does it have to be sourced, it has to be shipped across the world, which is very carbon intensive. So that's where this notion of virtue signaling comes in, where people say, right, we're closing down all the coal power stations. There can't be any more coal power stations. We're going to close down all the gas storage facilities. We're not going to invest in shale. We're not going to exploit the gas resources that are here in the United Kingdom so we can look green, but we're going to have it done the other side of the world and shipped over. I mean, it is just nonsense. That increases the cost. And it makes if you want to look at it from a green point of view, it makes the carbon footprint worse.
Well, my expression for it, Ben, is I call it net stupid, not net zero. And just finally, Ben, before I let you go, and thanks for your time, would you support a referendum on the government's net zero plans?
I would, because it will be, what they're proposing will be the most expensive policy in British history. We're talking about trillions, not billions.
Fantastic.
And I think the public need to know what this is going to cost, what this is going to cost them, what it's going to cost the country, what it's going to mean for tax rises, what it's going to mean for restrictions as well, because it's also about what's going to get banned. And, you're not going to be able to go on holiday as much as you used to. You don't have to drive a car as much as you used to. The public need to have this information, and then they need to make the decision, because as we've seen with so many decisions that come from the top down, if the government try and push this on the public and crash their living standards, then they will be the ones ultimately that will be ousted. So it's got to be before the public.
I think you're right. Ben, thank you so much. Here's another prediction for you. I'm enjoying these predictions at the start of the union. I think that the disconnect between Westminster politicians from the parties represented there currently and the people in terms of net zero could well be greater than their disconnect over Brexit. We've got time for a very quick call from Alex in Cheltenham. Alex, good afternoon.
Hi, Richard. I think the problem is that Milton Friedman says there's four ways you buy things. And everything the government does is buying with other people's money and for other people to use. So the price doesn't matter because they're not paying for it. And the quality of life it gives you doesn't matter because they're not going to have to live it.
You're absolutely right. Other people's money. My expression is that an individual or a small business will always spend £1 in their pocket and get more value, more productivity, and spend that money wiser than some civil servant spending it on your behalf.
I mean, if you look at Liz Truss going for a meal at some members club, it was £1,400. That was spending other people's money for her to use. So the price didn't matter, but the quality was important.
Yeah, they could have just cordoned off a section of Pretz down the road.
Well, if she was paying for it herself, she might have done. But she was spending other people's money.
There you are. Alex, great call. I love it. You're absolutely right. I think it's a scandal. Thank you very much for that. I would talk longer, but we've got to take a quick break. Coming up, of course, at 4 o'clock, it's Drive Time with Jeremy Kyle. But now we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be talking wine and why certain prices of certain wines are going up. It's Tice Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Radio where you can let off some steam. Reason re-engineered.
We think what you think.
Smart speaker, smart TV.
Deadly accurate debate.
Talk first, talk fast.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It is 3:45, not long now before Jeremy Kyle is here for his first show of the year. We've got some other great tweets coming in. Andy, he says, the Earth has existed for 4 or 5 billion years. How have we killed it in 150 years? I think he's inferring he doesn't quite believe some of the data, but you could read that the other way round. We've also got, this is an interesting one. This is a very good thought. Peter says, to discuss, if energy cost was index linked to income, I wonder how popular it would be in the middle classes. That may get great question of the day. I think we might well come back to that. And another one here is the energy crisis in the UK is entirely due to unelected eco-zealots and no one else. So there we go. But we need to talk about wine. Many of you may well enjoy your wine, may have enjoyed lots of wine over the Christmas period. I certainly do. But we need to have a discussion with the Chancellor, don't we? Because I'm not actually sure he drinks anything, which may mean that he's less concerned by this. But some of Britain's most popular wines are set to see a significant price increase due to the changes in the budget, supposedly to make alcohol duty fairer. Well, it seems to me the wine drinkers are the big losers in this. And maybe there's some other winners. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Dan Belmont, proprietor of, I love this title, Good Wine, Good People. Dan, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us and Happy New Year, Happy Bank Holiday. Thank you. The Daily Mail had a piece here showing the price of some of the favourite bottles that are enjoyed by Brits up and down the country, the reds, the whites, and there's a couple of my favourite tipples in here where there's some significant price increases being talked about. 4-5%. What's going on? How's this happened? Help my listeners and viewers.
So this tax reform is no different than most. There are winners and losers, and it's incredibly complicated. It was complicated before. You could argue that parts have been simplified, but it's still pretty complex. And so really what you need to know is that historically sparkling wine, bubbles, has always been taxed at a much higher premium duty rate than that of still wines, right? And so the difference was almost specifically 53p per bottle And that gets added on with VAT, right? And so what's happened is the new proposed legislation is leveling the playing field between still and sparkling wines, making no distinction. So winners, English sparkling wine producers making mostly bubbles, and Prosecco drinkers, which has a dotted line to the pubs and on trade where bubbles are being poured prolifically.
And so champagne drinkers as well?
Yep, all sparkling wines, correct.
So they've had their duty reduced, and of course they're the more expensive bottles.
Well, and that's because there's been a premium duty attached to them previously. So, it is definitely a move that supports, again, your pubs and your on-trade, your hospitality sector, as well as your local wine producers, our English wine industry that's making, again, mostly sparkling wines.
Right. Okay. But in a sense, so the winners are the people who can afford sparkling wines, champagnes, and the losers are those who who can't afford those drinks.
Well,
and who'll drink a more sort of standard bottle of red or white wine from Italy or from Chile or from England.
Well, so the big change with the still wines now is that the duty levels have been basically previously set on alcohol content, and they still will be, but they've changed the brackets, right? And so now we are lumping pretty much everything that sits above 11% together. Okay.
Right.
And so most still wines that we drink, red or white, are going to clock in above 11%. So winners, folks that are seeking out lower alcohol alternatives, losers, the fine wine sector. I mean, folks like myself that deal primarily in fine wine above 11%.
I was going to say, I mean, you can't find many wines, frankly, that I would have thought are worth drinking below 11%.
Sure.
I certainly have. I mean, I quite like sort of 12%, the Pinot Grigios types. But it does seem to me there's a massive difference between an 11.5%, 12% wine and a 14.5% Shiraz from wherever it might be, Australia or somewhere.
Absolutely. So previously that level cut off at 15%. So only wines above 15% saw another premium tacked on, a different bracket. Now it's kind of all lumped together based on the quantity of alcohol per liter. And so things like sherries and port are unfortunately going to get hit the hardest, which is such a shame because they're having a good couple of years. They're coming back into favor. They're being used for cocktails and things like that. And now they're going to take a big blow.
Okay, so the sherry and ports are going to take a big blow, but it does seem to me that the wines that an average Brit would drink between, let's say, sort of £6 and £8 a bottle, actually they're also going to see a 40 to 50 pence uplift.
Yep.
In order to help the wealthy middle class drink their champagne cheaper. Is that right?
Kind of. You have to remember what you're paying for, right? If you're spending £7 on a bottle of wine, you should already know that half of that is going to VAT and duty, right? Then you've got to take off your margins. You've got to take off your packaging, your label, your bottle, your shipping, your handling, all that. And so ultimately your value of what you're actually drinking, the wine in the bottle, is unfortunately pretty cheap stuff. It's cheap juice, And so I think what's good about this situation is that we are making more people aware about how these duties and rates affect what we spend our money on, right? And so if you were to increase to a 10-pound bottle of wine, okay. Stay with me, right?
Yeah.
The value of the actual wine in the bottle exponentially grows by almost 300%.
I've got it. So yes, so you've got in a sense you've got more bang for your bucks in terms of the quality of the wine in the same size bottle for a £10 bottle rather than a £6 bottle.
And that hopefully ultimately trickles down to better labor practices at wineries and just kind of smarter, educated consumer decisions here in terms about what they're putting into their body and what ultimately goes into these massive vineyard sites.
I got it. I'm fantastic. Well, I think it's I'm pretty shocked that surprise, a Conservative government seems to be making champagne cheaper and ordinary cost-effective wine more expensive. Go figure. Whilst I've got you, Dan,
sure.
Being being a huge fan, actually, during lockdown, I deliberately targeted English wines. I was down on the south coast and was drinking some great wines from Sussex and from Kent. There is a huge growth in this industry. What's causing it? How fast is it growing? And will it continue to grow?
So it's an incredibly popular market for sparkling wine right now, as you've mentioned. And I think, the government's perspective is that they see English wineries producing more sparkling wine than anything else. And so it's not necessarily meant to help champagne drinkers as it's meant to help the local wineries here in England. I mean, there are currently over 800 vineyard sites in the country. I believe the last number I saw was about 180 wineries producing wine here in the UK. The wines are just getting more and more popular. You have all the hallmarks here in England of a classic wine growing region, terroir, climate, soil type, all that kind of good stuff coming together to make some really good fruit. And it's, I guess we could say it's one of the small perks of climate change. And
here we go. So here we are. So we identified potentially the most important benefit of global warming, which is that it's good for the English wine industry.
So here's the thing. I sell a organic, biodynamic red sparkling wine from Wales, and I think it's delicious. And I don't think that would have been able to happen 10 years ago.
That's a new one on me. A red sparkling wine from Wales.
Yep, it's produced organically. It's very impressive stuff, really.
Off air, we're going to have to find a way for me to get a bottle of that. That sounds absolutely fascinating because there's obviously an improvement in the techniques, but I think I've also heard that actually there is a genuine change in the quality of the soil in some areas, which is helping this. Is that right?
Yeah, I think soil health when it is taken into consideration can always be improved over what's happened previously. And so ideally, these new vineyards are being planted on clean vineyard sites, but there's always, you could take time to regenerate that place and make for healthy soil and a healthy ecosystem. Because again, all the bones and the structure are there for really, really high quality premium wine.
That's fantastic. So this is an industry that's going to grow and grow. And in a sense, we're going to ask people to buy more and more great English wine and English sparkling champagne.
I think they should.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm going to see if I can get a bottle of that Welsh red sparkling wine. Dan, thank you so much for your thoughts there. That was Dan Belmont, proprietor of Good Wine, Good People, talking about that. And talking of good people, you're not going to believe it, but just cruising into the studio.
In the name
Happy
of
New
God.
Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
What happened? They didn't tell me the 3rd of January was a bank holiday.
I know. It's extraordinary. London's deserted. What's going on?
London's deserted. There's nobody that's on here normally. By the way, what a pleasure to hear. And I'm going to say this to you, dear listener. The man should be Prime Minister. You're a legend. How are you? No, I would.
Well,
I'd vote for you.
Most importantly, really good news, Jeremy. We've identified the main benefit of global warming. More English wine is being made.
This
more
is
English
excellent
sparkling
news.
wine. This is great breaking news.
I don't know what you did on New Year, but I'm quite proud to tell you that I did a magnum of red wine in 2 hours from 4 p.m.
Wow. How did you feel on Saturday morning?
I went to bed at 10:45 on New Year's Eve. Honestly, man, a magnum of red wine.
That is
ridiculous.
That is ridiculous. I have to say, you did much better than me.
Did you?
The problem with red now for me, it's a sign of my age.
Pinot Noir.
Well, it's just I go to sleep and then I wake up halfway through the night and that's me done. I'm like buzzing.
Yeah,
So I'm moving towards white.
I'm actually lying. It was me and one other, but I mean, I still consider that quite impressive. My good mate Adrian. The problem is, I don't know. You're much younger than me, aren't you?
I don't think I am.
How old are you?
57.
You're exactly the same. Actually, he's older than me. He's quite an old guy. At 56.
You look so much younger. You must have had.
Don't start that. I must have had work. No, not at all. When I went to America, this is absolutely true. To do the Jeremy Carr show, 12 years ago, I walked into this studio and I was so proud the first day. It's a 100-foot poster and it says my studio, my staff, and this bloke went, oh no, just looked at me and went, oh my God, no, your face, your teeth, oh
what?
No.
How
That's
rude.
the first thing he said to me. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, back to New Year, right? I think it's not what it was, is it? At our age,
it's not.
And we have to get up for a wee anyway.
Well, there's that, and there's just a whole bunch of issues. New Year at our age is not quite the same. Well, thanks very much.
I love
indeed.
Richard Tice.
Coming up, Jeremy Kyle, don't go anywhere. You've been a fantastic audience and viewers enjoying Tice Talk. I'll be back tomorrow. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.